Drake just took one of the biggest L's of his career. And this time, it's not on stage, it's in the courtroom. His $75,000 legal gamble has officially backfired. And the ruling has fans saying one thing loud and clear: Kendrick was right all along. For weeks, Drake tried to spin the narrative that he was being targeted, that the industry was against him, and that this lawsuit would finally prove his critics wrong. But instead of walking away as the victim turned victor, the judge's decision completely flipped the script. What was supposed to expose a conspiracy has now left Drake looking desperate, reckless, and, worst of all, defeated. And the timing couldn't be worse. With Kendrick already taking shots, the courtroom embarrassment only adds fuel to the fire. Social media exploded within minutes of the ruling, with fans roasting Drake for trying to rewrite history yet again. Some even said this is the clearest sign that Drake's empire is starting to crumble right before our eyes. The question now is simple. Was this Drake's final attempt to control the narrative, or just the beginning of an even bigger downfall? Stick around, because what comes next might change. Hip-hop forever. Drake has always been known as one of hip-hop's most powerful figures, an artist who turned Toronto into a global hub, dominated the charts for over a decade, and built an empire around the OVO brand. But in 2024, something changed. The same image that once made Drake look untouchable has started to crack. And what makes it worse is how each move he makes seems to backfire one after the other. The latest and perhaps most damaging example came with his shocking $75,000 legal gamble. On the surface, it looked like Drake was ready to finally prove that he was the one being wronged, that the industry, the media, and especially his rivals were plotting against him. But instead of walking away as the victim who beat the system, the courtroom ruling left him looking weaker than ever before. To really understand how this moment became such a disaster, we need to rewind. For years, Drake has been locked into an unspoken rivalry with Kendrick Lamar, while Drake built his career on radio dominance and catchy records. Kendrick positioned himself as hip-hop's truth-teller, the voice of the culture, the one who could challenge anyone lyrically and still come out on top. Fans saw it as a clash of two worlds: commercial dominance versus artistic credibility. This tension exploded when Drake began lashing out during his latest tour. What started as small rants about betrayal and fake friends turned into full-blown meltdowns on stage. Clips went viral of Drake shouting about conspiracies, about people wanting to see him fail, about being painted as the villain, even though, in his words, "I put everybody on." That narrative, Drake painting himself as the victim, became the heart of his $75,000 legal move. In his mind, this lawsuit would be proof that he wasn't crazy, that people really were out to get him. But when the judge rejected his claims, it wasn't just a legal loss, it became a symbolic one. For fans, it was confirmation that Kendrick's earlier statement, "Kings don't cry when the kingdom gets tested," was spot on. And here's where the story gets even deeper. Drake's entire brand has shifted. Instead of celebrating music and achievements, his energy has gone toward defending himself, rewriting history, and convincing fans that he's still the underdog, still the one fighting against impossible odds. The problem: everyone knows Drake isn't the underdog. He's been one of the biggest artists in the world for years. So when he leans into victimhood, it comes across as desperate, even delusional. Meanwhile, Kendrick continues to play his role perfectly. He doesn't rant, he doesn't spiral on stage. Instead, he delivers short, sharp statements that hit harder than entire Drake speeches. And that contrast has been brutal. Every time Drake tries to prove he's misunderstood, Kendrick reminds fans why he's seen as the real king of the culture. The $75,000 gamble could have been Drake's chance to flip the narrative. Instead, it only reinforced everything his critics already believed, that Drake is spiraling, that he can't control the story anymore, and that Kendrick was right all along. Now, fans are asking the real question: is this just another bump in the road for Drake, or are we witnessing the slow collapse of an empire? Drake's $75,000 legal gamble wasn't just a lawsuit, it was an attempt to control the narrative. To him, this wasn't about money. It was about proving he wasn't paranoid, proving people really were conspiring against him, and proving Kendrick Lamar's shots about him being soft or crying were wrong. But here's the problem. What works in hip-hop battles doesn't always work in court. On stage, vague subliminals, emotional speeches, and claims of betrayal get fans hyped. In a courtroom, you need cold, hard evidence, and Drake didn't have that report suggest his team tried to frame the case as proof of a targeted campaign to ruin his reputation. But the arguments were weak, scattered, and inconsistent. Instead of building a clear narrative, Drake leaned on emotion the same way he does in his viral rants. The result? The judge shut it down and Drake walked away, not just with a $75,000 loss, but a public embarrassment. Meanwhile, Kendrick didn't even need to move a muscle. His earlier words, "Kings don't cry when the kingdom gets tested," suddenly felt like prophecy. Drake was literally crying in court while Kendrick was out selling shows, performing flawlessly, and staying silent. Silence became his weapon. Fans saw through everything. Social media turned the ruling into a meme factory overnight. One viral tweet read, "Imagine spending $75,000 just to prove Kendrick was right about you crying." Another said, "Kendrick gives us Pulitzer-level art, Drake gives us lawsuits." The ridicule was brutal, and it showed that fans no longer bought into Drake's endless victim narrative. And that's the bigger story here. Drake built his career on being untouchable, the one who outsmarted rivals and dominated charts. But now, every move makes him look weaker. The victim card worked when he was the underdog, but after over a decade on top, it feels hollow. You can't be the global superstar and still act like the world is plotting against you. The failed legal gamble also highlights how disconnected Drake has become from hip-hop culture itself. Traditionally, beef is settled in the booth with diss tracks, sharp lyrics, and stage dominance. Drake choosing lawsuits and public meltdowns instead of bars makes him look out of touch. It's not just a legal loss, it's a cultural one. Meanwhile, artists like Kendrick and Tyler, the Creator, are showing the opposite path. Kendrick's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers was about growth and accountability. Tyler's Call Me If You Get Lost celebrated creativity and individuality. Their performances feel grateful and polished. Fans see authenticity. Drake's theatrics, in contrast, feel desperate and performative. That desperation is also reflected in his circle. Instead of grounding him, his team seems to amplify his worst instincts, encouraging him to double down on conspiracies and victimhood. The OVO brand, once sleek and dominant, now feels chaotic and messy. Even his merchandise and fan slogans push his victim narrative more than his artistry. And now, with this failed gamble, Drake looks like an artist who's spending money trying to buy validation instead of earning it through music. For a superstar worth hundreds of millions, $75,000 doesn't sting financially, but symbolically, it screams weakness. At the same time, Kendrick's silence is deafening. He doesn't need to respond. The court ruling, the memes, and Drake's meltdowns do all the work for him. In fact, by saying nothing, Kendrick looks stronger. Fans admire restraint, something Drake clearly lacks right now. The irony is undeniable. Drake tried to prove he was being unfairly attacked, but in the process, he only proved Kendrick right. Every rant, every meltdown, every failed attempt to rewrite history lines up with the exact image Kendrick painted: a superstar who can't handle the pressure of his own crown. For hip-hop, this moment marks a turning point. The culture has always valued strength, authenticity, and dominance through music. Drake's legal gamble shows how far he strayed from that foundation. Instead of being remembered as the artist who always had a response, he risks being remembered as the one who tried to fight battles in court instead of on wax. The $75,000 ruling wasn't just a loss. It was a message. A message that the victim narrative doesn't hold up anymore. A message that hip-hop won't reward theatrics over authenticity. And a message that Kendrick Lamar's crown is more secure than ever. Not because he fought for it, but because Drake gave it away. Drake's $75,000 legal gamble will be remembered as more than just another courtroom drama. It was a turning point. A public exposure of how far the Sixth God has drifted from the qualities that made him a legend in the first place. The ruling didn't just hit his wallet. It hit his image, his credibility, and his legacy at this stage in his career. Drake should be celebrating victories. He should be remembered for his influence on a generation of artists, his ability to dominate the charts for over a decade, and his cultural impact across music, fashion, and entertainment. Instead, he's trending because of legal failures, emotional rants, and desperate attempts to control a narrative that keeps slipping through his hands. That's the irony of this whole saga. The man who once built his brand on being untouchable now looks fragile. The man who once played the role of the underdog too well is still trying to play it, even though he's been at the top for years. And fans aren't buying it anymore. The victim act worked when Drake was battling to prove himself against giants. But when you are the giant, crying about conspiracies feels hollow. Meanwhile, Kendrick Lamar doesn't need to say a word. Silence speaks volumes. Every failed move Drake makes reinforces Kendrick's earlier warnings about fragility and performative victimhood. The culture now sees Kendrick not just as the better lyricist, but as the artist who embodies restraint, authenticity, and strength under pressure. That contrast couldn't be sharper. And it's not just about these two rappers. This legal saga exposes something bigger, a shift in hip-hop itself. Fans no longer reward theatrics without substance. They crave authenticity, vulnerability, and growth, but in a way that feels earned, not forced. Kendrick, Tyler, J. Cole, and others are proof that you can bare your soul without looking desperate. Drake, on the other hand, risks crossing into self-parody, where every move he makes only proves his critics right. What makes this even more tragic is that Drake still has the talent. He can still deliver hit records, infectious hooks, and moments of brilliance. But every time he chooses lawsuits over lyrics or meltdowns over music, he chips away at the very foundation he built his empire on. At some point, the audience stops laughing with you and starts laughing at you. And that's exactly what happened when this ruling came down. So what's next? That depends on whether Drake is willing to pivot. If he leans into this loss, owns it, and delivers music that addresses the vulnerability in a real, authentic way, he could flip the narrative. But if he keeps chasing validation through money, lawsuits, and rants, the decline will only accelerate. History shows that even the biggest stars can fade when they lose touch with the culture. For now, one thing is clear. This $75,000 failure wasn't just a legal defeat. It was cultural confirmation. Confirmation that Kendrick Lamar's portrayal of Drake, fragile, paranoid, and clinging to a crown he can't carry, is more real than anyone wanted to admit. And in hip-hop, perception is everything. Drake may still have the hits, the money, and the fame. But unless he changes course, he risks losing something far more important: respect. And respect is the one currency in hip-hop that no amount of money, not even $75,000, can buy back. So, as the dust settles, the story isn't just about a lawsuit. It's about a superstar who gambled on the wrong fight, and in doing so, reminded the world that maybe, just maybe, Kendrick was right all along. The fallout from Drake's $75K legal gamble goes far beyond the courtroom. This wasn't just a loss on paper, it was a cultural event that forced the hip-hop world to reflect on authenticity, power, and what it really means to hold the crown in rap. The shockwaves rippled through fan communities, rival camps, and even the broader music industry. And the most telling part, the way people reacted revealed more about where hip-hop stands today than the lawsuit itself. First, let's start with Drake's position. For more than a decade, he has been hip-hop's most consistent hitmaker. Nobody can deny his dominance on the charts. He redefined streaming numbers, built OVO into a recognizable brand, and positioned himself as the face of mainstream rap. But with dominance comes responsibility. The culture doesn't just watch what you drop, it watches how you carry yourself under pressure. And this time, the pressure exposed cracks. Drake's choice to fight a legal battle over $75,000 didn't feel like the move of a global superstar. It felt petty. Fans questioned why someone with hundreds of millions in the bank would even bother, making this a headline. Worse, when the judge's ruling turned against him, it created the exact opposite effect of what Drake intended. Instead of proving strength, it showed fragility. Instead of rewriting the story, it reinforced the idea that he is more invested in ego battles than artistic evolution. This matters because hip-hop is built on perception. Legends are remembered not just for their talent, but for how they handled conflict. Tupac and Biggie are remembered for their fearlessness. Jay-Z is respected for his business acumen and calm control. Nas earned his crown through resilience and lyricism. Drake, however, is increasingly remembered for emotional breakdowns, online rants, and questionable decisions. That contrast cuts deep, especially when standing next to Kendrick Lamar, who has embraced the opposite approach: silence, control, and carefully timed precision. Kendrick didn't even need to drop a diss track this time. A single statement at "A concert kings don't cry when the kingdom gets tested" was enough to frame the narrative. That's the power of cultural authority. While Drake shouted and sued, Kendrick whispered and won. It was a masterclass in restraint, and the hip-hop world took note. The response from fans reflects the culture shift. Younger listeners are tired of manufactured drama and victim narratives. They want honesty, vulnerability, and growth, but in ways that feel authentic. Kendrick's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers gave them that. Tyler, the Creator's Call Me If You Get Lost, gave them that. Even Kanye, in his chaotic way, has always balanced spectacle with raw vulnerability. Drake's rants, by contrast, feel performative, like a script written to win sympathy rather than truth. The irony? This lawsuit loss turned into content. Fans turned it into memes. Rival stands used it as ammo, and the media amplified it as another chapter in Drake's decline. Instead of focusing on his music, the conversation shifted to his desperation. And in hip-hop, once the narrative moves from respect to mockery, it's hard to shift it back. But here's the deeper issue: the way Drake's fanbase, the OVO loyalists, responded. Rather than question his actions, many doubled down. They framed the ruling as proof of bias, claimed the industry is rigged, and pushed conspiracies that Drake is being targeted. This kind of blind loyalty reveals how hip-hop fandom has changed. For a portion of the culture, it's no longer about artistry, it's about identity. Supporting Drake isn't about liking his music, it's about defending him against perceived enemies. That tribal mentality can be dangerous. Instead of pushing artists to grow, it traps them in echo chambers. Drake's rants about conspiracies and betrayal gain traction because his core supporters amplify them, not challenge them. In the long run, this hurts both the artist and the culture. When the biggest rapper in the world is rewarded for victimhood instead of innovation, it lowers the bar for everyone. At the same time, this saga gave Kendrick and other artists even more credibility. By simply avoiding the noise, Kendrick positioned himself as the adult in the room. Tyler continued to focus on creativity. J. Cole delivered reflective verses without theatrics. These artists represent a hip-hop culture moving toward substance, while Drake seems stuck in spectacle. So what's the real impact? This $75,000 legal fail became a symbolic moment, the moment where Drake's crown looked shakier than ever. It didn't matter how many hits he had, how many stadiums he sold out, or how much money he flaunted. The culture saw vulnerability, disguised as strength, ego disguised as injustice, and spectacle disguised as authenticity. And once the culture sees through the mask, it's almost impossible to put it back on. Hip-hop thrives on narratives. Every rapper tells a story of survival, of triumph, of struggle. Drake's story right now is one of paranoia, victimhood, and decline. Kendrick's story is one of discipline, patience, and quiet dominance. And as long as those two stories continue side by side, the audience will keep asking one question: who really holds the crown? The real explosion didn't happen in the courtroom, it happened online. The moment news broke that Drake's $75,000 legal gamble had failed, social media lit up like wildfire. Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, TikTok, every platform turned the ruling into content. And in today's hip-hop landscape, perception online is just as powerful as performance on stage. For Drake, that meant the memes came fast. Screenshots of the judge's ruling were remixed into skits. GIFs of Drake looking stressed were paired with captions like "Man took an L," bigger than the lawsuit itself. Some fans joked that he should have spent the $75,000 on better bars. Others posted side-by-side comparisons. Kendrick dropping a calm verse on stage while Drake was losing his cool in front of lawyers. The internet decided this wasn't just a legal defeat, it was a cultural one. But here's where it gets complicated. Drake's fan base, the OVO diehards, immediately went into defense mode. They framed the ruling as part of a bigger conspiracy against their idol. The system is rigged against Drake, some claimed. He's too powerful. That's why they want to bring him down. Instead of asking why a billionaire superstar was wasting energy on a $75,000 case, they doubled down, painting him as a misunderstood genius constantly under attack. That kind of blind loyalty speaks volumes. It shows how hip-hop fandom has shifted from critical appreciation to tribal allegiance. In the 90s and early 2000s, fans debated bars, beats, and storytelling. Today, entire fan bases rally around the idea of protecting their favorite artist, no matter what. For Drake, this means that even when he stumbles, his base spins it as proof of his victimhood. In the short term, that shields him. In the long term, it fuels the narrative that he can't take accountability. Meanwhile, Kendrick fans and even neutral hip-hop heads saw the moment as validation. They didn't need to say much. The ruling itself told the story. Drake's desperate attempt to control the narrative had backfired, and Kendrick's quiet restraint once again looked like wisdom. On social media, fans started quoting Kendrick's past lines, "Sit down, be humble," as if he'd predicted the moment years in advance. The media played an equally important role. Outlets from TMZ to Rolling Stone framed the ruling as another example of Drake's messy era. Headlines read like setups for punchlines. Drake's legal flex turns into $75,000 flop. Or, from charts to courts, Drake takes another L. These weren't just reports, they were stories being shaped, narratives being cemented. The press leaned into the angle that Drake was unraveling, and every headline made that perception stronger. It's worth noting how Drake himself responded. Instead of taking the high road, he fueled the fire. Passive-aggressive Instagram stories, cryptic captions, and live rants painted him as someone who couldn't let go. The more he tried to spin the ruling as an attack on him, the more the media amplified it as weakness. That's the paradox of modern celebrity. The harder you fight to control the narrative, the more control you lose. This cycle of reaction and spin didn't just affect Drake's image, it set the stage for hip-hop's ongoing conversation. About authenticity, fans and media alike questioned what's real and what's performance. Was Drake's lawsuit a genuine attempt at justice, or just another way to play the victim and stay in headlines? For many, the answer was clear. This was theater, and Drake was the actor who forgot his lines. And so, the cultural scoreboard tilted again. Fans laughed, the media dissected, and Kendrick didn't even have to lift a finger. Drake's $75,000 loss wasn't just money down the drain, it was another chapter in the slow erosion of his untouchable image. Because in hip-hop, perception is everything. And right now, the perception is that Drake is fighting battles outside the booth while Kendrick is winning wars inside it. The fans see it, the media amplifies it, and the culture remembers it. For more than a decade, Drake was the golden boy of hip-hop. He wasn't just successful, he was untouchable. Every album went platinum, every single dominated charts, and every feature he touched turned into a hit. He wasn't only an artist, he was a cultural machine, but the $75,000 legal loss and the way it played out in the court of public opinion highlights something bigger than one failed case. It represents a turning point in Drake's legacy, one that may define how he's remembered when the dust settles. Let's start with the obvious. Drake is no stranger to criticism. Since his earliest days, he's been accused of being too soft, of relying on ghostwriters, of hopping on trends instead of setting them. Yet, for years, none of it mattered. He consistently silenced critics by doing the one thing no one else could do at his level: dominate commercially and culturally. At the same time, whether you loved him or hated him, you couldn't escape him. That was his power. But today, the landscape feels different. Instead of laughing off criticism, Drake is leaning into it, sometimes defensively, sometimes theatrically. The $75,000 lawsuit is just one example, but it fits a larger pattern. Drake increasingly seems more concerned with controlling how people see him than with letting the music speak for itself. When an artist shifts from creating culture to reacting to it, that's when cracks start to show. This is where Kendrick Lamar's shadow looms large. Kendrick's approach has always been the opposite. Where Drake thrives on visibility, Kendrick thrives on absence. He disappears for years at a time, only to return with music so strong it resets the conversation. He doesn't chase memes or lawsuits or headlines, the art is the headline. And that contrast is what makes Drake's recent moves feel desperate. When you compare the two, one looks like a master strategist, the other like a star scrambling to hold on to his spotlight. The danger for Drake is that this narrative may harden into legacy. Hip-hop is a competitive sport, and history doesn't just remember the hits, it remembers the stories behind them. Jay-Z isn't just remembered for the blueprint, he's remembered for outlasting Nas. 50 Cent isn't just remembered for Get Rich or Die Trying, he's remembered for ending Ja Rule's run. For Drake, the story risks becoming, he was the biggest in the world, until he got caught up in distractions. That's not to say Drake is done. His catalog is too deep, his influence too wide, and his fanbase too loyal for him to simply fade away. But legacy isn't just about music, it's about perception. If Drake becomes known as the artist who couldn't handle criticism, who played the victim instead of the victor, then his massive success might always come with an asterisk. And here's the irony. Drake has the talent to flip the script at any moment. A focused, hungry Drake in the studio could remind the world why he reached the top in the first place. But each time he invests energy in lawsuits, petty rants, or cryptic Instagram shade, he feeds the narrative that he's lost focus. The question now isn't whether Drake is still a superstar. He is. The question is whether he'll be remembered as a giant who stood tall, or as an artist who stumbled trying to fight battles that didn't matter. Kendrick doesn't need to say a word for this legacy debate to unfold. Every time Drake trips in public, Kendrick's silence becomes louder. Every rant, every failed legal move, every desperate headline, it all plays into the idea that Kendrick was right to call him out. That's why this $75,000 loss resonates so much. It's not about money. It's about symbolism. Drake built an empire on controlling culture. Now, for the first time, culture seems to be controlling him. And in hip-hop, where ego and narrative are everything, that shift may matter more than any chart position or streaming number. In the end, Drake's legacy will depend on what he does next. Does he double down on victimhood and legal drama? Or does he step back, recalibrate, and remind the world that he can still drop music that cuts deeper than headlines ever could? Because right now, the verdict isn't just about $75,000. It's about whether Drake's story will be remembered as the rise of a legend or the unraveling of one at the end of the day. Drake's $75,000 legal gamble wasn't really about money. For a global superstar worth hundreds of millions, that figure is pocket change. What makes this loss so significant is the story it tells about where Drake stands right now in his career. In hip-hop and in the public eye, Drake has built his empire on being untouchable. For years, nothing could pierce the armor of success. Not ghostwriting scandals, not diss tracks, not criticism about being too commercial. But this moment feels different. Instead of brushing it off, he looks rattled. Instead of moving forward with the confidence that made him great, he seems stuck fighting battles that only make him look smaller. That's why this legal loss matters. It's not about the $75,000. It's about perception. Fans and critics are reading it as another example of Drake playing the victim, chasing control, chasing sympathy instead of just letting the music speak. And when you line that up next to Kendrick Lamar, an artist who thrives on silence, discipline, and letting the art do the talking, the contrast couldn't be sharper. Drake's greatness isn't in question. His catalog is filled with anthems that defined an entire generation. But legacy isn't just about the past, it's about the story you write on your way out. If Drake keeps chasing lawsuits, headlines, and social media drama, then his story risks being one of decline, not dominance. The choice is his. He can double down on this defensive, victim-driven narrative, or he can remind the world why he became the biggest name in hip-hop in the first place. One more classic album. One more undeniable moment. That's all it would take to flip the conversation back in his favor. Because when the history books are written, people won't remember the court filings. They won't care about $75,000. What they will remember is whether Drake walked away as the artist who let distractions destroy his throne, or as the legend who faced adversity and proved, once again, that no one could touch him. Right now, the pen is still in his hand. The only question is, how does Drake choose to write the next chapter?